Um, so let's go to the question one. If you've ever heard Jay speak or read his book or listened to his podcast, he has complicated feelings about the word best practices. And one thing that I get from surveying partner managers is they feel like they got the same set of tools to use. So like blog posts and white papers and webinars, and everything gets kind of samey, especially when we can't even do in-person events anymore.
Right.
So let's start big. Why does it matter that we just don't default to the same old best practices, the things that are in a million blog posts?
I don't know that it matters that we don't default to best practices. What matters is we find the best approach for each of us. And, from a young age in school, we're always taught there's a correct answer and therefore wrong answers. And I think then we get out into the workplace, especially in our jobs as marketers, especially when our jobs are to broker partnerships, let's say. And, even more specifically, a lot of us work for organizations that are brand forward, technology centric companies that love customer experience and all these things we hear about today. And we're pushing the envelopes forward creatively. And in that world where there's variables flying all over the place and change is constant, we still have this maybe not overt, but at least subconscious idea that there's a correct answer and everything else is wrong. And now we live in this era of infinite right answers. So it's like, well, what could we possibly do or know? And so we seek our answers out there in some generalized sense. And the problem with that is the best practice can be is close enough. It's close enough to your experience that I say on this call, well, in my experience, or well, in the studying I've done of the space, X, Y, and Z. And you're like, okay, that's great. X and Y don't apply to me. And someone else is saying Y and Z apply to me only. And someone else is saying that's perfect for my situation. And someone else is throwing it all out the window. So it doesn't necessarily matter that we reject best practices. What matters is we find the best approach for us. Now, the problem is we use the best practice as a shortcut to the best approach for us. But what's omitted in that equation is variables unique to us. And there's only really 3 that are present every time we make a choice, especially as marketers. There's you, the person or people who do the work. Then there's your customer, the specific human beings that you aim to serve. Then there's your specific resources. Whenever you make a choice, you're grappling with those 3 things, albeit mostly implicitly. And if you can understand how those variables change a best practice, change a new idea, it's like a filter system to making better choices. So we can get really practical on this call, but that's like the theory of this all. That's the theory of my book. That's the theory of why I say we should question best practices. It's because the best they can do is get you close enough. That leads to work that is good enough, and good enough will not cut it.
And writing about partnerships is actually really tricky because a lot of people want a formula or want a best practice. And for sure, there's basic tenets that should guide us. But everyone has different audiences or company size, different maturities. What your product literally does is different. And when you pull in another company to then partner with, it just exponentially increases the variables. And I think a lot of people feel frantic. I know I do, just working for something like a simple content swap. So I'm wondering, how do you cut through that when there's so much stuff being flown at you?
Well, let's establish something that we kind of agree on this call, you and me and everybody watching here. Let's establish that change, while we like the idea that it can happen in one fell swoop, just you tear the Band-Aid right away, what really ends up happening is you nudge things forward bit by bit. So when I propose something, the easiest pushback is, well, I have near-term numbers to hit. That's great. Carve out small pockets to push things forward, right? If you want culture change and you're a manager, affect the people who are immediately reporting to you or to the left and right of you. There's no such thing as an organization that changes quickly overnight, but what we're fundamentally talking about is change. So let's establish that it can happen bit by bit, and we can find small pockets. Now, when you're looking for something new to do or something different to do, I think what we do, because it's easy, again, I have numbers to hit, I have projects to hit, is we stop at this superficial level of, what organizations align with us. Well, I'll just pull an example from my history. For a year, I worked for HubSpot, and I was leading their content team. And a part of our team, it was about co-marketing. And so the playbook was established. We're going to write an ebook about a marketing topic where we have some features. Who is a point solution that goes deep into that area, like social media marketing? Let's partner with Buffer, and we'll do an ebook with Buffer about social media marketing. And then we'll cram it behind a lead gen form and drive traffic to it jointly and share the leads, right? That's the established playbook. What we were doing is we were stopping at the topic. It's like a podcast that's called marketing trends, the marketing trends show. It's really weak in its defensibility, and it's really difficult to come up with new ideas because you're at this like very superficial level. And what we should have been looking at instead wasn't topically or demographically what the other company is doing or what our shared audiences are. We should be looking at the psychographics. Like, who are we actually for and not for? What do we stand for? What's our vision of the world? And how do I find partners that see that same vision? Because we might do 5% of that vision for the world or for our audience, and another partner does the other 5%, et cetera, et cetera. So one example is Wistia is all about making business more human. And I've always admired, I've gotten to know their CEO a little bit, Chris Savage. I've learned a ton from him. He's been very helpful for all the work we're doing at Marketing Showrunners, and they're a sponsor of ours, full disclosure. So that's not why I brought them up. I've had a relationship with them for a decade or more, and the business is a year old. Anyways, Chris Savage has always said, we want to make business more human, and our video tech solves 5% of that problem, right? So you have this aspiration that's grander than we have leads to hit, or it's grander than we are this type of software and they are this type of software. It's this vision you have for the world. You can go find infinite numbers of partners if you're just focused on what it is they each do. But there's only a short list of great partners available if you focus on why you all exist. So I think starting there, digging deeper than demographics or the what of it all is a great first place to start, because then you jog loose more ideas as you start to get more tactical and plan things out.
So I think that definitely fits from like a brand perspective, right? Like aligning the psychographics of our two brands. I can see how you get there. There's some cases where we are literally making an integration just because like we are in the same workflow of the same kind of person, right? And we need to somehow market that.
Right.
Is that, how would you marry something like an execution of a marketing campaign that is like, I think much more practical and results oriented, maybe, I mean, you can push back on me, than something like we need to better articulate our brand.
Can you give me an example?
So, well, to use your like Wistia, let's say Wistia is partnering with, make this up, Twitter, right? Because every time we post a new Wistia post, it'll auto tweet. And like, we need to tell the world that this thing exists, right? So it's like very brass tacks, practical. This is a feature we have together. And I think a lot of people just default to be like, here's a blog post, it exists, boom. And I'm wondering, is there a more elevated way to think about that?
Yeah, I mean, marketing is not telling people you exist. And I feel like that's what we default to so often. It's like, where can I put this link? And getting more strategic or creative means a more clever place to put that link, more clever place to tell people we exist. Being relevant or creating relevant content means you've been granted a glance your way and nothing more. Like, that's not the job. The job is not who's looking at you. The job is not awareness. The job is affinity. The job is relationships. Marketing's not about who arrives. It's about who stays. Nothing else gets built or done unless that happens. So I don't quite have the prescription here, but I can say with confidence that if all you're doing is going about telling people you exist and looking for partners who are also willing to tell their audience that you exist, you're not starting in the right place.